Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tiger Tank 12, however you call me. I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks. This is my fourth attempt to make this video. Unfortunately, every single time there's something that just came in between. So let's hope that this is the final attempt that I need to do. So today we're going to be reviewing the standard heavy tank, the TNH 105-1000. This is the new Tier 8 Czechoslovakian heavy tank, the non-premium one, and it's quite an interesting vehicle. I've played the VZ44-1 and I liked that in the end. I did not like it at first, but in the end I really did enjoy the vehicle. So yeah, the TNH 105 is quite an interesting tank in my opinion. It combines the medium tank philosophy with the heavy tank philosophy. That's something that Wargaming has been doing for the last, let's say, about 2 years. It's been a bit of a mixed bag sometimes, but still, I myself, a medium tank player, I like to play faster vehicles, and I think that's quite up my alley right here with the TNH 105. We're talking about a vehicle that is fully upgraded. We're not talking about the stock tank, but it being stock, I can give you guys a couple of tips. I would go for the upper row first, because the turret and the gun, the top gun, are really worth it, and they can be put on the stock version of the tracks. And then I would go for the tracks, and then I would go for the engine. I would not waste any time with the magazine fed 105mm gun, because it just has really bad dispersion and it has really bad aim time as well. Now, this vehicle right here, as we can see, is a very interesting design. It's a longer TVP, and it has a turret that looks really awkward. I think it's quite interesting to see that the turret is mounted very far at the front, not in the middle of the vehicle. So yeah, I think the design looks quite neat, but it's nothing too special. So let's jump right into the firepower tab. We have a 105mm gun with average damage of 320, and that's about the average damage you have at tier 8 nowadays for heavy tanks. 224mm of penetration is really good as well. You have APCR shells as premium shells that have 252mm of penetration, but you only ever really need them against tier 10 vehicles and tier 9 vehicles, because I think the pen of 224 is going to be enough if you know the weak spots. The shell velocity also isn't a very big step up, because it's only 100 meters per second faster. Now, as I already mentioned, the rate of fire is actually not too bad. We have a rate of fire of 6.4 rounds per minute, which is about a reload time of 9.38 seconds for a single shot. I do have a good crew, but I don't have any gun rammer, because you cannot fit gun rammer on this vehicle because of the auto loading capacity that you have. The gun traverse and the turret traverse is actually quite nice, 33 degrees per second. You can really work with that, and I think it's something that's right down the middle. It's not too great, it's not too bad, it's right, it's good enough, and I think that's a great way to deal with this. 7 degrees of gun depression will not allow you to be the ridgeline warrior, but it will allow you to, play certain ridgelines that aren't too big. But what you have to keep in mind is you only have 15 degrees of positive gun elevation, so you might not be able to shoot too far up if somebody is above you. The aim time, on the other hand, is actually quite nice on the gun. I do have equipment for that, and I do have brothers in arms as well, so I do get it down by a little bit. But the aim time isn't too bad, with not 1.96 or about 2.2 if you don't have the equipment. You can really work with that, and the dispersion is also not too bad either. I think the dispersion is about 0.34 on average, but I have 0.33 because of brothers in arms, and I think you can really work with that. That's something that isn't very common. Now, the DPM, as already mentioned, I think is the best with this gun. 2048 is not the craziest amount of DPM, but still I think you can work very nicely with that kind of DPM with this vehicle. So let's move on to the survivability. I do have improved hardening on this vehicle to get that 150 HP additionally on top of the 1500. I think it's worth it, because this tank isn't the most heaviest armored vehicle in the game. It does have some very nice angling at the front and 125 millimeters thickness, but it does have the machine gun port. There's also another view port. You have a very big lower plate, so there are a lot of places you can shoot this tank, and you can also even shoot like in between the tracks right here if the vehicle is right in front of you, and you might be able to penetrate the vehicle. The 80mm of side armor and 55mm of rear armor will allow you to side scrape a little bit, but not too much. But I think it's going to work at tier 8 at least, and maybe even a bit at tier 9. Now the upgraded turret will give you 230mm of frontal armor, 90 on the side, 60 on the rear, and you have a very big cupola on top, which is a huge weak spot. But I like that. I like when vehicles have a weak spot on top of the turret, and I think it's only fair, and it should be there, and I'm glad that they added it on top of this tank. The thing is, 230mm of frontal armor on the turret is quite nice, but if people start loading gold, it's going to be a bit more difficult. You have this nice, very nice and handy heat shield, which will absorb a bit of heat, but the spaced armor will not completely absorb every single shot. So keep that in mind. This tank is not as heavily armored as other heavy tanks. But we get to the main strengths of this vehicle, and that is mobility. This tank is rather light for a heavy tank with about 50 tons. You have a decent engine inside of this vehicle, 750 horsepower, and you have 50 kilometers per hour top speed. Now that's really nice. That means you are going to be able to even drive with certain medium tanks and be very flexible if you maybe want to play on a medium tank flank, or if you want to play on a heavy tank flank. You can decide. You're going to be able to move from one place to another quite rapidly. What I've noticed though is that the reverse speed isn't very good. 15 kilometers per hour is not the best. And also what I've noticed is that soft stats aren't the greatest on this vehicle. So it's going to be a bit difficult to have the best or maintain the best speed on soft ground such as grass and mud and snow, all of that kind of stuff. If you're driving on paved roads, I think you're going to be able to drive quite quickly, but without the support of paved road, it's going to take a bit longer. And I think that's definitely fair, so you have to take a bit of a closer look where you're driving. The traverse speed, on the other hand, for a heavy tank is quite good, 35.56 degrees per second. That comes in with the skills that I have currently on this, and with, you can see, Brothers in Arms, off-road driving and clutch braking. This is something I would highly train and highly advise to have on your crew when you're playing this tank, because having that additional ability to turn faster is going to be making you more competitive. Now moving on, concealment and spotting aren't very important. Concealment, it is a heavy tank, so I don't think you expect a lot of concealment on this vehicle, but what you might expect is maybe not the best view range. That is the case. You only have 370 meters base view range with the top turret. So you're basically going to be going in blind unless you do train your crew and you do have a bit of equipment on it, or maybe use premium consumables. I did decide to use coated optics because I had them lying around, and I did put them into the one slot, and you can see at 424 meters, I think that is decent and you can work with that. But I think that the biggest strong points of this vehicle are definitely its gun, its decent survivability in certain situations, and its mobility. This coupled together will allow you to be very flexible and, with the survivability, like survive a bit more than you would occasionally do in other vehicles that have maybe less armor but more mobility, such as the AMX line. But still, I think this is a very nicely tuned tank, and if it's fully upgraded, you're going to have a lot of fun if you enjoy heavy tanks that are a bit faster. And I think I've talked enough. Let's jump into a game. Let's see what this tank is all about, how you can use it, how well you can play it, and what you can do to fight against this TNH 105. So let's jump over to the gameplay. So I wasn't sure which gameplay I should pick for this review, because I had another game where I did more damage, but since I wasn't really
playing too aggressively in that match because the enemy team didn't contest my position. I thought it was not very, it's not a very good way of showing what this vehicle is all about, because I was just sniping at tanks at the back. And so I decided to pick this gameplay, which isn't as spectacular in terms of damage, but still pretty nicely shows off the capabilities of this tank and what you can achieve with the TNH 105-1000, because this tank is indeed a very, very cool vehicle. So you can see we're a heavy tank, and instead of going into the city on the map, Live Oaks, we're going down to the tracks. That has mainly to do with the fact that this tank can reach up to speeds of 50 kilometers per hour. Now the thing is that I didn't mention it right there, but the top speed does suffer a bit on the soft ground because this vehicle doesn't have the best soft ground stats, but you can still work with it. So having the 50 kilometers per hour top speed and the 750 horsepower engine allows you to get from point A to point B quite nicely. And as you can see right here, we do have the 7 degrees of gun depression, and that allows us to use this little hill quite effectively, although it has its limitations. As you could see right there, we weren't able to hit that TNH, but we are going to be able to put one shell into the 703 right there and put him like at 500 HP or something like 700 HP. That was really important because you can see that the enemy team does have numbers advantage on us right now. The very nice thing about this tank is the turret armor. Now this turret armor, as I already mentioned, is 230 millimeters thick. You have a very big weak spot on top, and if the enemy team would take a bit of time to aim for it, they probably would hit it. But as long as you play a bit more cautiously on the ridgeline, I think you're going to be doing just fine with this tank. I don't think that it's overpowered in any kind of state, but in this position right now, it is really kind of powerful. Right there you can see, as soon as you have two tanks targeting you from different sides, you do have a bit of a problem. That's just like in any tank in World of Tanks. But as you can see, we are able to turn our turret quite effectively. So this is what I meant with the flexibility in the preview tab, because being able to turn your turret as fast as we can right here allows you to be the most flexible and allows you to fight on several sides at the same time, and maybe even be on your own for a little bit of time against one or two vehicles. So far it looks like this match has been quite even. We have kind of a front line going down on the 9 line. We have a front line going down on the E line because the enemy team did not push into the city. And now we can see just what is the main problem for this tank. Now, if people start shooting gold, it doesn't matter if you have 230 millimeters of armor on your turret, they will go through. And that's something you have to keep in mind, because this Type 61 is going to start slinging gold, and also this tortoise sitting in the back is going to start penetrating our cheeks because he has enough pen to go right through them. That's something you have to keep in mind when you're playing this tank. 230 millimeters of turret armor doesn't sound extremely competitive, but it's good enough on ridge lines against certain tanks. You'll get some bounces out of it, and even your upper plate is quite nicely angled, so you're going to be bouncing some other shots as well, because the 125 millimeters of armor are just enough. Now you can see that we are in a bit of an awkward position because we have Skoda flanking us. I'm not really sure if this Skoda is thinking it through, but as you can see, the gun handling, we haven't talked about the gun handling at all. I think the reload time of 9.4 seconds is really shown off quite nicely here. It's, I think, just good enough. The alpha of 320 is really nice, and also the aim time. It doesn't take us long to aim in, the reticle closes in fast, the accuracy is decent enough. So this makes us a very good medium to close range brawler, and even at longer distances we do have quite the advantage of being able to be a bit more accurate than our fellow other Eastern Bloc states, like maybe the Soviets, or I don't even know, the Japanese heavy tanks, which are absolutely trash, by the way. But still, I really enjoy this tank because it's quite flexible and it actually offers quite nice protection. But that protection obviously is not going to be working against the premium shells. That's why you need the HP. This tank, I think, is on the side of being pretty nicely balanced, maybe a bit more powerful than the standard tier 8 heavy tanks that you have. But as you can see right there, he just goes right through our tank with those heat shells. And it doesn't take a lot. He can go through the heat shield, he hits our cupola. And if the players, get a little bit more time playing against this vehicle, I think they're going to be a lot more competitive in taking it out, and they will know the weak spots a lot better. So I think the cupola on top will be a main target, and I don't think you'll be seeing a lot of people just missing the cupola at all, because the cupola is such a big one and it's poking out like very aggressively, and it's quite easy to hit. But I think that's a good thing, because I like it when the game has kind of a bit of a skill level in there, and when you can't have a vehicle that is completely unbalanced. And I really like that this vehicle is balanced. Its frontal armor, I think, is decent. Really, it's not bad. But with that cupola on top, with the machine gun port, I think you should be able to take this on even with a tier 8, even with a tier 7 tank. And if you do know anything about this game, you're going to be able to do quite a bit of damage. So right there you can see, unfortunately for us, we have been left alone because everyone died, because our entire team died in the south on the K0 quadrant. And now we're going up against another TNH 105 and some other vehicles. I think it's Stridswagen K. But I think so far we've been doing quite nicely. We've been able to bounce about 1,700 damage, and we've been able to do about 3,000 damage combined. You can see right there, this is the stock gun, I think the 105 gun if I'm not mistaken, and he was firing APCR and he just penetrated the roof of our tank, or he penetrated the cupola on top. And as you can see, getting hit in the cupola, it's quite easy to take us out, and we weren't really able to do anything right there. I'm just gonna let this game play out. It is, I think, still going on for about 2-3 minutes. It's been quite interesting right now because we are actually down one tank and they have the numbers advantage and also I think the hit points advantage, but we have some very dangerous tanks. We have the Object 7772, which is a very competitive tier 9 vehicle, and the ST1, which might not be as fast as other tanks, at tier 9, but still the ST1 is a very competitive vehicle with all the armor it has, and I think we need the armor to be able to breach into any kind of position and push those tank destroyers out of their hiding spots in the back of the map. But either way, I think it's a great time to talk a little bit about the final verdict on the TNH 105-1000, what I think of the vehicle. I have to say, in stock, I did not like the TNH 105. In stock, I did not like the VZ44-1, but that's a given because stock tanks are completely different from their fully upgraded counterparts. I really like the setup that I have going with it. I like the equipment that I'm using. I like to have more HP on that vehicle because, as you might imagine, you will be going into certain games where you will be kind of brawling more, but I would highly advise against being the heavy tank without support that is brawling very aggressively against other heavy tanks, because the fact is that if the players know what they're doing, they are going to start targeting your cupola, and it's really easy to take on your cupola, and it doesn't take a lot of skill to hit that thing because the cupola is that big. But I think it's a good thing that the tank has a cupola, because otherwise, if there was no cupola, I think it would be a bit overpowered once more, because it just doesn't have a weak spot on top of the turret. And if you're playing a tier 8, you're playing tier 7, you're playing tier 9. Okay, let's say about tier 8 and a half, it would be quite difficult to be able to take it on without a cupola on top. But still, I think it's a really nicely balanced tank. It has mobility, it has a great gun, at least the later stage, the last gun that you unlock, I think is really competitive. I think the armor layout is really nice as well. It has obvious weak spots. You can take it out if you need to. You just need to know the weak spots. And that's what I like. Those are old school tanks. Maybe the overall feeling is that it's a bit better than the standard tier 8 heavy tank that you have, because it's so flexible and it has the speed, it has the armor, and it has the gun. But still, I think those stats aren't completely crazy. You don't have the craziest amount of gun depression. You do not have the best pen at tier 8 for a tier 8 heavy tank. You don't have any kind of special shells as APCR for standard shells or something like that. And your armor layout has obvious weak spots. Your top speed, on the other hand, is really, really good, but that's, I think, the main motto of the Czechoslovakian heavy tanks, to have the mobility available to you. And I really like that. I think this is a line that I will really enjoy. I've heard a lot of good things about the tier 10 and the tier 9. I've heard that the tier 10 is supposed to be extremely overpowered, and we'll just have to see what that is all about when we get to it. But still, I really enjoy the tier 8. The tier 8 fully upgraded is so far a really good pick, a really decent vehicle. I think people that tend to be a bit too aggressive, that make maybe a couple of mistakes here and there, might be liking this tank if they come from the medium space, and they've just always enjoyed the faster gameplay of World of Tanks with medium tanks, but they want to go into the heavy tank alley. I think they will enjoy this kind of line, and they will enjoy the TNH 105-1000, because this tank does have the armor, and it will forgive a couple of mistakes, but still you'll have to learn. It's going to be a bit more difficult to master this tank, because in the end, if you have to master it, you have to keep in mind all of the weaknesses, that the soft stats aren't the best probably, that you have to look into the situation with the cupola on top. The reload time is decent with 9.4 seconds. You can really be a quite independent heavy tank, in my opinion, but you're not going to be the complete damage output that some other tier 8 heavy tanks have, that with their higher DPM guns but lower alpha guns. But I still think it's a very nice combination of facts, and I would say I will really suggest playing the TNH 105-1000. This is a tank that I would not skip. Fully upgraded, it's a lot of fun, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the other tanks. I think the TNH 105-1000 Wargaming hit the nail on the head, and yeah, I've enjoyed it so far. And tell me what you think about this vehicle, and I see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one.